Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2022 annual business meeting of the Association of Midwest Museums. I am Charity Counts, the executive director of AMM. We're based in Indianapolis, the ancestral homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, Shawnee, Wee, and Kickapoo communities. I pay respect to these communities and their elders, past, present, and future. Today's meeting features brief announcements related to AMM member business, followed by a discussion with museum educators and authors of the new book, Museum Education for Today's Audiences, Meeting Expectations with New Models. Before we begin, I want to share a couple of housekeeping notes. First, members should have received an email from us with the annual business meeting agenda and reports, along with materials for board elections and approval of minutes, and a link to vote on these items in advance. Some of these items will be referenced today, but don't worry if you don't have them in front of you. Second, I want to call attention to the fact that we have started a recording of this webinar. Our goal today is to present live, but also share it later and involve as many members as possible by having this virtually. We're also offering ASL interpretation today. You can pin the interpreter to a standard location on your screen by right-clicking on the interpreter's video and selecting Pin Video. We have also turned on Zoom's built-in live transcription feature. To turn on or off closed captions, there should be a CC button in the menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. We encourage you to use the chat feature anytime today to interact with each other or any of the board members and panelists present in our program. We will use the Q&A function of Zoom for the panel discussion later in the program. Finally, we'd love to find out where you're joining us from. So please, as we launch into business, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining from today. You might mention your organizations or your city and state, whatever you're comfortable with. All right, let's get started. I'd now like to turn it over to Katie Van Allen, Managing Director of Museum Services at Missouri Historical Society, to offer welcome remarks and call this meeting officially to order.
Hello, thanks, Charity, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. A few days ago, I was talking with one of my colleagues here at the Missouri History Museum about the sort of struggle of time to make time to connect with our colleagues in settings like this, or even more significant big swaths of time like next week's conference in Milwaukee. And I'm guessing that many of you had those same conversations. Given all the pressures that we face each day in our respective organizations, combined with the general state of the world, our jobs are more challenging than ever. We are on a seemingly repeat refrain of fatigue, grief, confusion, anger. That said, I am finding that making time like this for colleagues in the field is always worthwhile and maybe more important now than ever. When we get together, we get to be real. Sometimes that means we are tired and burnt out and cynical, but it's a safe place to do so. We can talk about all those shared experiences in a safe setting, learn from one another, recharge, lift each other up. And you all deserve that. We all deserve it. This time to reflect, recharge, honor our humanity, which sometimes gets forgotten, and to be the leaders and educators we want to be. So no matter what kind of institution we work for or the positions within, our collective roles are pretty remarkable and a privilege to have. So we provide spaces for visitors to have fun, to be awestruck, inspired, to spark curiosity, to connect with one another, to learn about our communities and the world around us, to grieve when needed. And when we are doing our very best work, our visitors can even leave motivated to make change and work for a better world and better community. So today's panel discussion on museum education is all about this and ways for us to be active on that front now. It's also about the vital role that museum educators play and the need to better support those individuals in all of our organizations. Looking forward to hearing from all of them, the panelists today, and thank them in advance for spending time with us, and look forward to the lessons we will all carry away from this conversation today. So the AMM board as a whole, as well as Charity and myself, want our role as a resource and a support for anyone and everyone in the museum community. It's perhaps especially important right now to say that that includes women, communities of color, transgender people, all those within the LGBTQIA+ communities, and museum professionals from around the world, including those living in war-torn places. There are likely others within our museum sphere that you're thinking about a lot of late. And if that's true, please feel free to comment on that in the chat and we can add to that conversation. I want everyone to know that AMM is here for all of you. It's here for me and my museum. I know it's a ready resource for all of you. And we hope that today's program is meaningful as we look and do our collective work together. So I now, with that, call the 2022 annual business meeting of the Association of Midwest Museums to order. Our first order of business is with Kate Kaczynski, who will announce the results of advanced voting for 2 of our business items on board elections and approval of minutes. So, Kate.
Thank you so much, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Kaczynski with the Grand Rapids Public Museum and Service Secretary for AMM. Members previously received an email notification containing a digital copy of minutes for the 2021 annual business meeting, which was held virtually via Zoom webinar. Members were also asked to vote in advance to approve the minutes as presented. There were no corrections submitted via our survey form. I am looking for a motion to approve the 2021 annual business meeting minutes as presented.
So moved.
I got a motion by Brenda Rainey, and I'm looking for a second.
Second.
Thank you, Ellen. We will now share the on-screen results of advanced member voting. You can see those on screen here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who voted. And based on these results, the 2021 annual meeting minutes are approved as presented. And I will now pass the mic to Leslie Wright, immediate past president, who will share the results of our board elections.
Leslie, you might be muted.
Okay, hang on. Let me get the text up here. Okay, I'm Leslie Wright. I'm coming to you today from Grinnell, Iowa, where it's a beautiful summer day. I am the just retired director of the Grinnell College Museum of Art, and I am the past president of AMM. And it's just a little bittersweet to be doing this meeting because it's my last annual meeting as a board member. But as a representative of the nominating committee, I am very excited to share with you the results of our board elections. Members received a digital copy of the board roster and voted in advance to approve the roster as presented. So let me introduce our wonderful new board candidates. Nominees, please unmute and say hello when your names are read. First, Cinnamon Catlin Laguto from the Illinois State Museum in Springfield, Illinois, who's moving into an at-large role on the board from her current role as a senior advisor. Welcome, Cinnamon.
Hello, everyone.
Next is Susan Claver from the State Historical Society of Iowa in Des Moines, Iowa. Welcome, Susan.
Hello, everyone. Hoping to see some of you next week in Milwaukee.
And finally, Monica Walker is joining us from the Dayton Art Institute in Dayton, Ohio. Welcome to Monica.
Thank you. Great day to all.
In addition to new board candidates, we have also presented 5 at-large board members and officers up for re-election. We have Ellen Sensky from the Milwaukee Public Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Cheryl Darr from the Magic House Children's Museum in St. Louis, Missouri, who is nominated for a final term as our treasurer, where she's done a fantastic job. Paul Flatten from the Discovery World in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Charles Katzenmeyer from the Field Museum in Chicago, Illinois, and Brenda Rainey from the Minnesota Historical Society in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I need a motion to approve the 2022 board roster as presented.
So moved.
Thank you. And can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. Now let's take a look at the results of advanced member voting. Hurrah for the 100% approval, and thank you to everyone who voted. Based on these results, the roster is approved as presented. Please join me in a round of applause to welcome our new and returning board members and officers. Cheers to all. It's very exciting to have such a wonderful board to continue the work of AMM. Up next, I'm passing over the mic to Charles Katzenmeyer and Brenda Rainey with recognition remarks.
Thank you, Leslie, and we're going to miss you from the board. I'd like to take a few minutes to recognize several individuals and organizations that have not yet been mentioned. First, thank you to everyone who's pledged support or contributed to the Association of Midwest Museums annual fund in 2021 and already this year. This includes our patron members and George R. Fox Society members. Contributions in 2021 totaled $7,935, and we've already received over $10,000 in gifts and pledges in 22. On the screen in front of you is our 21-22 donor honor roll. I hope you'll join me in a round of applause for all of the people who support us through their annual giving. And next to my friend, Brenda Rainey.
Thank you so much, Charles. Next, we would like to thank our corporate sponsors and organizational partners whose support in the past year made AMM programs possible. In particular, we wish to acknowledge the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as well as our regional and technology partners on the Digital Empowerment Project, as well as Mutual of America for supporting our Fall Leadership Series and our Spring Museum Worker Wellbeing Series. And finally, to all of our 2021 and 2022 conference sponsors and partners. We especially want to acknowledge Conserve, our 2021 virtual conference presenting sponsor, and Solid Light, our 2022 presenting sponsor. Thank you for your generous support. And thank you to everyone who's here today and watching later for your dedication to the Midwest Museum community. I will now hand things over to Charity for a recap of programming from the last year.
Thanks, Brenda. Give me one moment here to stop sharing this presentation and switch over to a video. All right, each year as part of the director's report, I like to share what we've done together as a community of museums. Because a picture is worth 1,000 words, this year's programming recap is once again a highlight reel video. I'm going to play it now. All right. We quoted Vu at the end of that video. I couldn't say it better myself. You are amazing, all of you, including our members of the board here today. We're so happy that we get to gather with many of you soon, virtually and or in person during Forward Together, our 2022 joint conference, a partnership with the Wisconsin Federation of Museums. Soon after Milwaukee, we will begin work on our 2023 conference. I'm not going to announce where that is yet. Stay tuned for details on the location and more soon after Milwaukee. Please also be on the lookout for upcoming announcements about this year's AMM Awards recipients and opportunities to celebrate and learn from them this fall during virtual community celebrations. And finally, I want to share that the Board of Directors and I recognize that many aspects of museum work are in flux these days as we emerge from the pandemic, rebuild operations, and explore and manage change on many fronts. We also recognize that there are many questions we all need to or have begun to explore about museum values and practices. AMM will be dedicating the next 12 to 18 months to identifying and exploring these questions with you as a collective, as a community. We will focus new programming on sharing new thinking and approaches and connecting you with your peers, to gather perspectives. So please also be on the lookout for opportunities to participate in this process and in these programs, including helping us identify and refine a set of essential questions to guide this exploration, such as the ones you see on the screen right now. And by the way, if there are questions listed here that resonate with you particularly, please comment in the chat and let us know. I think that's about it for the director's report. Thanks for listening and watching today. It's now time for our special program. I'm going to stop my screen share and then get started with the program with our panelists. All right, please join me in welcoming our guest panelists, Jason Porter, the Kayla Skinner Deputy Director of Education and Public Engagement at Seattle Art Museum, Mary Kay Cunningham, founder of Dialogue Consulting, Juline Chevalier, museum interpretation professional and museum educator, and Lauren Zalut, Director of Education and Tour Programs at Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'll turn the program over to you, Jason and Mary Kay.
Thanks, Charity. It's great to see everyone and hope you're all doing well. I want to start off by saying I am coming to you from Seattle, which is the traditional homeland of the Coast Salish people. And we are going to talk a little bit with two of the authors who appeared in the book that Mary Kay and I co-edited, which just happens to be located right here on my bookshelf, Museum Education for Today's Audiences, which came out in February. And we have been talking at a number of these types of gatherings with people about sort of the state of museum education and the lives of museum educators. And we've been having really interesting conversations, and I'm really looking forward to this one as well. Juline's chapter in the book was about a study that she spearheaded early in the pandemic of the impact of the pandemic on museum educators, and drew some conclusions about how the pandemic had directly impacted the work and the labor and the kind of lived experience of people working in museum education during that volatile time. And Lauren's chapter that she co-wrote with her colleague Sean Kelly is about sort of a project that the Eastern State Penitentiary does, which includes and seeks out formerly incarcerated educators to be part of their teaching staff. And so we'll talk with both Juline and Lauren a little bit about kind of the work that they did in their chapters and the sort of where they are now and thinking about the ideas that they included in the book. And hopefully some of those lessons will be instructive to you in the work that you do with museum educators in your institutions. So we thought we'd start by just addressing the impact of the pandemic on museum educators and museum education as a profession, which is what Juline was kind of interrogating in the chapter that she wrote. We often hear people talk about the impact of museums in terms of dollars and cents, but we also should talk about what was asked of educators during this time and the positive and negative impacts of leadership decision-making across the profession. Juline, your work was a research study of the pandemic's impact on museum education in its early phase. Can you share a little bit about what you found in the research and any learnings that continue to challenge the field now?
Absolutely. So hi, I'm Juline Chevalier. I worked at the Minneapolis Institute of Art for about 5.5 years. So have a great connection to the Midwest. Unfortunately, my position there was eliminated due to COVID-19. So, you know, the impacts of the pandemic are near and dear to my heart. I'll just give a little description of myself. I am a white middle-aged cis woman. I've got a round face, pale skin, brownish red short hair, black cat eye glasses, and I'm wearing some fun bubble wand earrings today. They make me very happy. So during the pandemic, the pandemic is still going on, let's remember that. But in 2020, I was serving in the role as division director for the National Art Education Association Museum Education Division. And in that role, I was lucky enough to work with folks from RKNA Research, which is now rebranded as Kira Collective. And they're folks that we had worked with in the past on some major research, impact research about the impact of a single museum field trip visit. But they agreed to work with us pro bono and survey the field. So we put out a survey between September and October 2020. We received around 400 responses. After vetting people through a few questions, we have between 245 and 289 responses per question. Our average respondent was a white woman, 25 to 44, with a master's degree and 10 plus years of experience in the field. One of the things that we had hoped to do with the survey was to find out the impact, whether it was disproportionate on Black, Indigenous, and educators of color. Unfortunately, we had such a low response rate from BIPOC folks that we weren't able to draw any conclusions, and that is a failing on our part of distributing the survey well. What we found from those responses, and again, so this is a snapshot of pretty early in the pandemic, so October 2020, 34% of respondents had negatively impacted in some way. I apologize for external noise. I am visiting family in Virginia and our internet is out and we don't have good cell reception. So I am in my car in a shady spot. So apologies if you can hear the trucks in the background. And so 34% of respondents, a third, had some kind of negative impact on their livelihood. So whether that being laid off, furloughed, pay being reduced, hours being reduced, that is a really big number that we need to pay attention to. When we asked people to estimate whether they thought, or what their gut reaction was, whether education was impacted more or less than other departments in their museum, those results were not as conclusive. But around the same time, Wilkening Consulting came out with a survey, and they asked, which departments are being most impacted by the pandemic, and top was visitor services and security, and second was education. And we also know from that same survey that 67% of respondents were cutting public programs in education. So that's the kind of laying the groundwork, the big picture. But the things that really make me concerned about, worried for my colleagues, worried for people in the field. I'm somebody who's been in the field for about 20 years, so I guess no longer emerging professional. But the empathy burnout is something that I was really took note of in this. We asked people we had a list of things to choose from and asked them to rate what they're most concerned about. And after people's personal safety, because of the, just a pandemic, there were 4 other things that came before the museum educators' response of worrying about their own mental health and well-being. So people were worried about their personal safety, assuming their health, et cetera, but then they were worried about the safety of docents and volunteers, the safety of museum visitors, feeling heard in the museum, safety of front of house staff. And then on that list is my mental health and well-being. And that for me underscores one of the things that is exceptional and extraordinary about our field, but something that I think we have to watch out for as professionals and make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and not just worrying about other people. Because as much as museums can be considered, you know, family-like, and we like who we work with, et cetera, you know, these are jobs, and our job isn't necessarily going to love us back. And so we have to be careful about where we invest our time and energy. And the most pressing concerns were increased workload, stress, job security, diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion work, and museum management and operations. You know, I think burnout and demoralization were really high as concerns, you know, and making sure that we separate those two things, of burnout being the result of overwork and unrealistic expectations, and demoralization being unfulfilled or not being fulfilled in the same ways that you went into the field with. I went into the field to connect with people and make a difference. And if you're not feeling that that is actually happening anymore, that can lead to demoralization. And I think generally, you know, museum education is a relatively young profession. It's only around 40 years old, is having separate, you know, professional organizations and the like, and to have a third of respondents to this survey, so a third of staff, be impacted in some way, that is a huge hit to a relatively young field. You know, we need to keep looking at how the field is being affected. I'm sure a lot of people follow social media and see people leaving the field for one reason or another. I realize this is all a little bit depressing, but one thing that also came back to me in all of this, all of the responses to the multiple choice and the open-ended questions, was just how incredible, what Herculean efforts that were happening with museum educators. They were doing incredible work. They were seeing, you know, some silver linings of, well, my museum never was going to do digital programs, and because of the pandemic, we got to, and now we're doing it, and now we have all this stuff that's going to live on after the pandemic. Again, we're still in the pandemic, going to reiterate that as much as possible. So I was filled with a great sense of pride and just astonishment at the work that was happening in the field, and the great things that came out of that. I do just want to caution that that is exceptional and extraordinary work, and we need to make sure to appreciate it as such and not expect that forever and ever afterwards. I'll wrap it up there.
Okay, Juline, thanks so much for just giving an overview of your research. My name is Mary Kay Cunningham. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and I was lucky enough to work with Jason and Juline and Lauren. And unfortunately, Sean couldn't join us today due to another last minute connection or commitment. But I just want to build on what you were saying, Juline. I mean, the reason Jason and I have been sort of pining for this book for years was the idea of trying to bring attention and acknowledgement to the field of museum education, wanting so much to provide an opportunity to talk about the need for professional development and support of each other. And to, you know, again, I've been in the field for almost 30 years. Somehow, I don't know how that happened, but the first 10 of it were in the Midwest. So I also have this, I was in Chicago and Milwaukee, have a really strong connection with this group of folks. And I, you know, back then, I remember one of the reasons that I launched into sort of an independent realm of doing interpretation and visitor experience design and training of staff and volunteers on the front lines was because I just felt like there was a negative culture. There was a negative, especially when they were bringing in specialists or outsiders, and there wasn't enough value internally. And I think it's so hard to realize that even after this research and in the midst of an incredible crisis that is the pandemic, that that we're still fighting this to talk about our value and how we bring value to the organization. And that being said, I think we would probably find more broadly that everybody who works in a museum is sort of a heart forward individual. They care about the collections or the people wanting to learn. And I imagine everybody's sort of deeply impacted. So what I'm thinking about is, knowing Juline and Lauren and Jason, maybe anybody else who wants to comment, just to think about what do you think about in terms of what we need to focus on for staff development and sort of the care of individuals that are sort of ever recovering from the trauma of the last couple of years. And is there anything that we need to be thinking about how to support education teams and individuals? Juline or Lauren or Jason, anybody want to chime in? Or anybody that's here visiting today, watching?
I would love to have Lauren jump in if you've got something to say. I can always talk.
I was
so,
going to defer to you.
Well, I think that humanness, like we need to continue to recognize all museum staff as human and having lives. And again, let's have more human expectations of our staff. So professional development means, making sure that staff can, one of the best things I ever did with staff when I was managing a department was, this was an idea of Emily Haltrup, who's at the Cincinnati Art Museum, of a reading day. And our whole staff would leave, the whole education staff would leave the museum. We would all read the same article in the morning at a coffee shop. And then we would talk about it. Then we would have lunch. And then in the afternoon, we would all read something else and all individual things. And we would pause and say, oh, well, here's this really interesting thing. And here's this really interesting thing. And then we would chit chat about how it could apply to our, our existing programs and the like. And it was so refreshing and, just to get a break out of your space and to make the time, you're not having to read outside of work hours, you're reading during work hours. And that is an important and paid part of your ongoing professional regularly every month. I mean, yeah, you're missing a day of work, but you're not having to pay for hotel accommodations, registrations, etc.
Great.
That's really awesome.
How about you, Lauren?
Yeah. I'm thinking about a couple different things. Like I'm thinking about really encouraging the folks that work for me to take time off, especially this summer. I don't know what has been going on around the country. I'm based in Philadelphia. I don't have strong connections to the Midwest, but I have connections with so many of the folks that I see on this call. So I feel, and I was part of the mass action meetings, which happened in Minneapolis. So I feel connected to the Midwest when I'm on this call with everybody. But we were slammed in the education department this spring in ways that we never anticipated with a way smaller team. So I'm just encouraging people to take the summer, which is a slower time for the education department, to take some time away from the office. That's been a big thing. And I think throughout the past 2 years, as we faced, a halving of the people in our department, we were hit the hardest with layoffs, as well as the visitor services team here at Eastern State. Just like not pushing people, understanding that people have other things going on in their lives, and just saying like, how can we be more realistic about the output here? How can we meet our mission? How can we meet what's being asked of us from a financial perspective? While also taking time away and acknowledging that there's a lot going on like underneath all of our icebergs here at Eastern State. And we'll probably talk about this later. We talk a lot about trauma awareness and trauma-informed practice. And so I've encouraged people to take professional development in that realm. And I think that, those are actually free virtual programs. They're 12-week-long courses that are offered. And so just encouraging people to do that, because I think it's kind of like a both and. It's personally informative and it's professionally informative. And not only are we existing within an abandoned prison, which is inherently a site of traumatic experiences, we know that visitors are now coming to our sites carrying all of this with them because they're living through what we're living through too.
Yeah, Lauren, I'm hoping that you can kind of tell us a little bit more about the work that you talked about in your chapter, which is really sort of at the intersection of social justice and education and ethics and museum educator training. And in the, you talk a lot about sort of authenticity of interpretation in the chapter, and the effort to kind of bring formerly incarcerated people into the daily experience of what happens at the museum is really interesting. And it's such an innovative and sort of groundbreaking project. Hoping you could share a little bit more about the model and some of the challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. That means a lot coming from you. And Sean and I were honored to contribute to this publication. I also have my copy right here. So shout out to the book and to Mary Kay and Jason for inviting us into the project, and to all the people that are featured. So yeah, I work in an abandoned prison turned criminal justice museum here in Philadelphia. Eastern State's the first true penitentiary in the world. It opened in 1829, and pretty much anything that's going on in a prison today, you can like draw a line back to something that started in this building. This building also was huge, large scale, first ever use of solitary confinement for the explicit goal of penitence, people finding true regret and true sorrow in their hearts to go out into the world after incarceration, never to commit a crime again. And that was a failure. Solitary confinement, we now know, has incredible negative impacts on people, and even goes to the Supreme Court to be try to have it ruled as inhumane and unconstitutional. But that has not happened yet in our country. So we became a museum in 1994. Eastern State closed in 1970 as an active state prison, and the building was abandoned for about 20 years. So I also work in a stabilized ruin. I hope that if you all ever have the chance to come to Philly, that you'll come and see the building where I work, because it is powerful and it can teach us a lot. When I joined the staff in 2012, we had just decided to embark on a more hearty interpretation of mass incarceration. And this was at a time when mass incarceration wasn't really like in the mainstream vocabulary like it is now. And I think really like it has been over the past 2 years. It's been pretty incredible. We have always worked with people who lived and worked inside this building. Their voices are featured on the audio tour, which is how most people experience the site. We have, since the late 2000s, worked with currently incarcerated people as advisors on projects like our Restored Synagogue, like our landmark and award-winning exhibit, Prisons Today, Questions on the Age of Mass Incarceration, which Sean worked on and wrote a lot about in the article. And then in 2019, we did a huge project called Hidden Lives Illuminated, where we actually made films with people who are currently incarcerated at a prison about 40 minutes away from here, State Correctional Facility. And we made an extra considered effort to not only include the voices of people living in men's prisons today, but also people living in women's jails today. And to really bring those voices that we never really get to hear from in society, and who we have so many stereotypes in our mind about, right? What a person in prison might be like or say. We made that project, and we projected those films onto the 30-foot facade of Eastern State for a month in the fall of 2019. And if you were at AASLH that year, you maybe got to see it. And so because we had formed all of these relationships and these partnerships with reentry organizations, which are organizations in Philadelphia serving people coming home from prison, we started to hire folks who had been incarcerated. And we had hired somebody after a partnership with a prison dog training program. I won't go into that whole part of the story, but it's important to mention. We hired somebody onto visitor services who had lived experience in prison, and it wasn't his particular job to start talking about his time inside, but he wanted to do it, and he really paved the way to this innovation. So I think it's really informing those authentic relationships with folks who have been incarcerated, who are currently incarcerated. We were able to make that happen. It was really under his leadership that we began to do it. He and I collaborated on that program. We were able to raise money to start recruitment in that realm through the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, which we are a part of, where they provide funding for this kind of thing. And what I always say about the grant is it was a grant you could get and your project could fail and you wouldn't have to give the money back, which is rare, right? And so we started the Returning Citizens Tour Guide Project, explicitly recruiting people who are formerly incarcerated, taking all the trauma awareness trainings, essentially becoming a reentry worker in many ways. And so it's really a case of a museum intervening on the problem that it interprets, right? So we would provide jobs, we would provide partners who could support folks in understanding the impact of their criminal record or even trying to clear their criminal record. And so getting to become like part of the system and trying to interrupt the problems that that are part of this building's legacy. And we did that. We did that Returning Citizens Returning Citizens Tour Guide Project format 3 times. And then I would say like in the second year of the project, we realized that we needed a person who had lived experience in prison in the leadership of the project, that white middle-class woman from the suburbs, that's me, who had never been incarcerated, couldn't be at the helm of this project. And I think that what the challenge is that at every single turn and every single moment, we have to mitigate exploiting people, right? This job is paid. We were realizing that we were bringing folks on and we weren't able to get them another job after they left Eastern State. I was, setting up interviews in the field with other museums, and the folks that we had hired were being rejected for those jobs because they disclosed that they had a criminal record in the interview. So we have some work to do in this field. We were able to get a very large grant from Institute of Museum of Library Services, so IMLS, now is funding a new iteration of this project called the LEAD Fellowship. We realized that we needed to go with a fellowship model to get people on career pathways, not necessarily in the museum field, but that Eastern State is a lot of things, knows a lot of players in a lot of different sectors, and we could leverage those relationships to get folks career pathway work, not just a job, but a career that could sustain people and their families as they come home, and to provide all of those wraparound services that reentry organizations are positioned to provide. So maybe if Sean was here, he would say we're pushing the boundaries of what museums can do, sometimes in a way that is scary. But I also think it's what we need to do if we're going to do it authentically. So we now have a supervisor who is running that project, who has lived experience in prison. So we're doing that in collaboration, and we're currently recruiting that first cohort of what we're calling LEAD Fellows, Lived Experience Activating Dialogue. And these folks will work in many different parts of the museum, not just the education department.
Lauren, I think, one of the things that was, again, listening to you talk about this program, and certainly in reading the chapter, that I find just incredible is, how important it has become to your program, how much you've centered those voices of the incarcerated individuals that you're trying to share the experience of. And I know that you talk about how you sort of dance on the edge of feeling like there's, exploitation, there's concern for asking these people, but I know many organizations who are trying to invite new people in with lived experiences to engage their visitors in conversations that are outside their own realm, but like you said, those of my experience or others. What do you think? What have you done? I mean, you started to touch on it, to support those people that are sort of how are they coming together? Are they supporting each other in this process of becoming very vulnerable and sharing their stories and potentially being subjected to sort of negativity or not understanding from visitors?
Yeah. I think I want to share a couple of thoughts, and I can also talk about like what definitely does not work, because we've done it and it's been pretty hard. So I'm going to go to a quote that I definitely included in the chapter from my colleague Reem, who was an advisor to this project and then came on as the first supervisor in this project. And he really wanted me to heed my my sense of paternalism and trying to like build too much of a container around folks who had lived experience in prison, right? It's just like, come to work. You can make it about your lived experience in prison. You cannot make it about your lived experience in prison. Like, you do not have to tell this story. And so what I found is by being super hands-on, it actually made people feel so much more pressure to share than when I was hands-off. And so that's where we're iterating, and that's where we're going. We're saying, like, come into this fellowship. This does not have to be about you, but there are lots of people out there who are coming home who feel so much urgency about sharing their story for so many different reasons. And if people want to do that at Eastern State, then we're going to create a platform for that. If somebody who comes home and they don't want to ever talk about this again, that's okay. We would love for you just to like do a fellowship in our marketing department to set you up for your next job. You know, we just want to be that first reference, that first employer that can help somebody get to where they want to go if staying at the museum is not where they want to be. But I did a lot of things, and we did a lot of things, and I'm glad that we did all of these things to try to make sure that people felt taken care of and supportive. We have had iterations of social workers who would provide support, forms of counseling, group sessions. And then we also would work with outside evaluators who were like not me asking you questions about how things were going in the work, but somebody from the outside where people could really be authentic in what they were sharing. We did iterations where we would have monthly cohort meetings to just talk about what was going on and also provide professional development. So that's when we would bring in like a legal expert to talk about like, here's how you can clear your record. That kind of thing. Or, you know, something that we heard a lot from the folks in the previous iterations of this project was that they just like didn't know the history of incarceration, and that it was huge to understand that for them. And so bringing in scholars who could speak to that and give them access to those scholars and make those connections. So we've done a lot of different things. I think that, you know, there is no one way for each individual. And so for me, it's like providing a lot of different options that people can participate in should they choose to. But what I have found is like giving people the agency over their story and how they want to use it. You know, the real win here for me was when we just went like full on fair chance hiring for every position and just really forwarded that message. It now extends to a lot of our vendors that we work with at Eastern State. So we have fair chance employers that are vendors as well. And then, yeah, just like, and then the first time that we ever hired an educator who had lived experience in prison outside of this project, that was like, yes. So long answer.
A
I'd
good
love
one.
to
Thank you.
jump into with this idea of museums today wanting to have, you know, to get more lived points of view of lived experience into exhibition planning and interpretation, and that's so key. And one thing that I really related to with Lauren's chapter, and I'm excited to talk about here, is that balance of getting input versus exploitation. And I think one thing I want to remind everybody is that museums are inherently places of oppression for folks with marginalized identities, because museums in the US are inherently, you know, white supremacist culture and colonial institutions. And I'll illustrate that with having worked on Hearts of Our People, Native women artists at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. We worked with local Indigenous women, and we had a meeting at the museum. And one woman came in and, you know, she shared with us that, you know, she's somebody who has been to the museum before, knows us very well, and still gets nervous having to walk through the lobby past security, holding a coffee cup, even though she's in a part of the museum where she can have a coffee cup, just kind of tensing in anticipation of being told no, she's doing something wrong. And so that is something that we have to keep in mind. We don't want to coddle and, oh, are you okay? You know, but really keep in mind, especially for folks who are white, upper middle class, etc., that museums can feel very comfortable, but they are inherently not made for a lot of people that we are now trying to invite in and ask their expertise. And so just being aware of that your mere existence is violent in some cases. And I know that sounds strong, but it's to make a point. And so just realizing that and being very, very clear with your expectations for your staff, first of all, right? People who are planning an exhibition, etc. Think about what kind of pushback you could get. If somebody in our advisory group says that artwork should not be in this exhibition, what is your response? Or, are you willing to make changes in checklists? Are you willing to make changes in labels? Where are you willing to do so that we know what exactly we're asking from our community advisors? And even then it's going to get messy, but those are the things that I see as really important to have top of mind, because you can ask for input, but if you don't take it, then you're also making yourself less reputable in those communities as well.
So as we're sort of wrapping up, we didn't get to everything that we wanted to talk about and didn't dig into the specifics of both chapters in depth, but we did talk about some important things to consider when working with museum educators and when building staff and supporting staff. And I'm wondering, as you look to the future, what kinds of things are you feeling hopeful about with respect to working with museum educators or working as a museum educator? What kinds of things, as you're seeing, I know we're not through with the pandemic, Juline, I get it, we're definitely not, but what kinds of things are you looking as we sort of turn the corner that gives you hope? Lauren, you want to start?
Just the fact that we've been able to revive this project and get started with the new iteration, the LEAD Fellowship. This project was on hiatus from the time that the COVID-19 pandemic started until about 6 months ago. When this panel was meeting to plan this event, I was actually inside jail interviewing people for the fellowship. And so I just am so hopeful that we have the team that's going to bring this project forward. And we've been meeting with other museums about the possibility of employing folks at the end of that fellowship. And it feels like the field is really interested in taking this on. So that's what's giving me hope that we're going to do it. We're still here.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah. And I say too, there's a couple of things. One is the community and the organizing that has happened in museums, and a lot of organizing for unions, etc., has often been heavily populated by education staff. So I think that's really incredible. Support those efforts wholeheartedly. And I think being sure to look at our visitors, right? And we're always trying to expand who our visitors are, but realizing and going back to the positive impact that we do have on our visitors, seeing how, and I think this was highlighted in parts of your chapter, Lauren, that how much people were just bowled over by hearing lived experience and hearing from individuals. I've just started reading John Falk's new book about the value of museums and just how life-changing and not even in that huge something's going to be different or I'm going to follow this path, but experiences that literally stay with people for a lifetime. That is incredible. That is what we do in museums. And that is incredibly valuable. And I think remembering, when it gets tough, like go out onto the floor, go into your galleries, go into your spaces and see that people are actually interacting with your content and it is having an impact. So I think getting back to like, that's what got me into the field in the first place, is helping people connect in new ways. That trying to remember to go back to that is really helpful and keeps me going.
Mary Kay, did you have something?
Oh, I think I would just sort of echo. I mean, I think it is really interesting to me as well to see that there are so many museum educators who are the ones sort of pushing the organizations to do better, to think harder about the choices that they're making, and to really to walk the talk, like not just say, oh, we're behind these initiatives for diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility, but really like show us what you're up to. And I think that, refers to another conversation we had with a group of museum educators. We talked a lot about leading from the middle. And I think that's just incredibly important at this point. And unfortunately, it gets back to the first thing that Juline said, was just there's an incredible amount of expectation and responsibility that sort of lands in the lap of museum education teams. And it's not just the job description. It ends up being, we're the cheerleaders and we're the agitators, and we're always improving ourselves because we're learning addicts. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that there's a lot of responsibility and opportunity in this role. I know we should probably wrap up. I do think I'll just put this in the, and yes, Lauren, we are caretakers. It's really true, which is both beautiful and exhausting. We want to make sure I put in the chat that you'll see that there's a website that's associated with the book. And we want to encourage you all to go there. It's at evolvemuseumed.com, and with the idea that we're really trying to evolve our field and think, push our thinking. We do also hope that we were going to give away a book or two, and I can't remember. Are you ready to do that, Jason?
Yeah, I have a number between 1 and 100 in my head, and I've shared it with no one. It's Price Waterhouse. Actually, there's a little box on my desk that's got it with a key that I can't access. So if you want to put in the chat, if you want a book or you don't have one already, put a number in the chat, and the closest person to the number will get your address and send you a book. I'm watching the numbers. Ooh, I see someone who's very close. All right, is that everyone? Okay, the number is 22, because that's how old my daughter is. And looks like Anna had 24, so that's very close. So congratulations, Anna. It might be easiest, Anna, if you just message me individually in the chat your address, and I'll quickly write it down, and then I will mail you a free copy of our wonderful book. All right, I'll turn it back to you, Charity. Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jason, Mary Kay, Juline, and Lauren. Really great conversation to listen to. And I feel like there were several things I'm going to have to process later that you all mentioned that I hadn't thought of before about this whole situation. Next up is Katie with our closing remarks.
I am not going to make any remarks. I'm just going to thank everybody again. Really appreciate the time and for giving over your lunch hour to this conversation. Please, if you can, tune into our first all day of the virtual conference next week. And then also come to Milwaukee in person if you can. There are a number of people on this call that have been working really hard over now multiple years to bring this conference to life. So grateful for all of them and excited to see everyone. And then last, I will just say thanks to Charity, who always puts together an awesome annual meeting and makes all the magic happen and keeps us all moving forward together. So thank you all, and take care.